Well, thank you everyone for joining our session on working with government agencies. It's been about a year we've been planning this. And so I am extremely happy to finally be moderating this session. It's been a long process, but we're really fortunate, really happy that the city provided these resources. If you have any questions as we're moving along, there's two ways that you can ask questions. You can raise your hand, which is using the reaction function at the bottom of the screen, or you can type a message into the chat function, and I will be monitoring that, and I will see see that. I would ask that Aaron Grant and Mike Witt, who are my co-producers of this, if you see something in the chat function or a hand raised that I miss, please help me acknowledge that so we don't miss anyone. But ask questions as we go along. Obviously, we'll also have Q&A at the end as well. But when a topic is hot or a point is hot, we want to make sure we cover it during that time. Before I introduce our esteemed panel, I want to make sure that I introduce and acknowledge two people. Aaron Grant, who is the Community Development Loan Officer for Senair, and Mike Witt, the Vice President of Asset Management for Senair. They've been working with myself and others to produce these 5-6 trainings. Mike, would you like to say a few words about the sponsors and how we ended up here on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon?
Sure, thanks, Josh. These sessions are all put on by the City of Detroit's Preservation Partnership that they have put together. It's led by Enterprise, and I believe I saw Stacy Esbrook is on here as well. So there's a team that is leading this preservation work. Many of you have probably talked with Stacy or seen her around. And we've got 6 technical assistance sessions that we are doing as part of this program. They're aimed at existing developers or folks that are in the business of developing affordable housing and coming up with strategies and different ideas along the lines of preserving that long-term affordability of those projects. So, we really appreciate the partnership the city has done with us and are really excited to put on these trainings. Shameless plug, we have 4 more after today. They're the next 4 Wednesdays. And I know a lot of people have signed up for many of them. So probably a week or a few days before, you will get individual calendars, reminders, or appointments with the Zoom links in them as well. So keep your eyes out for those as they come as we get closer to each session.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. I much appreciate that. So now let's move on. I'm going to introduce our panel. And I would ask our panel just say a few words about who you are and the organization, your title, other things that you want to add. We'll start with the City of Detroit first. We have Corey Felposh.
Thank you, Josh. Hello, everyone. Corey Felposh. I believe I know most of you. I run the City of Detroit's asset management team as part of the Housing and Revitalization Department. In short, we have about 140 properties in our portfolio that are assisted with either home, NSP, Section 108, or other CDBG proceeds. And we monitor our projects on an annual basis and constantly work with our borrowers on solutions in regards to restructuring existing debt payments, recapitalizing projects with new proceeds to extend affordability. And we also work towards amending our existing affordable housing restrictions to increase the length of our affordability restriction.
Excellent. Thank you, Corey. Next, we have Chad Benson from MISHDA.
Hey everyone, Chad Benson with Mishta. I'm the Director of Development for Mishta. So I oversee pretty much all of our development programs, our direct lending program, our pass-through program, and our 9% tax credit program as well. So that's in a nutshell, that's sort of what my role is at Mishta.
Excellent. And next we have Troy Thalin, also from Mishta.
Hello, Troy Thalin. I'm the Director of Asset Management at Mishta. I'm kind of the back end of what Chad just described. His group, is obviously responsible for the production parts of it, and my group is more the ongoing oversight, regulatory restrictions, compliance, and things like that. So we're also involved, in some other things similar like what Corey's talking about with the city, where we'll help with, possibly regulatory relief, extending affordability, those kind of things. So once it leaves Chad's group in a nice tidy package, it heads up to me for the next 40 years. So
Thanks, Troy. And we have Andy Uzel from HUD, but I don't see him on.
I'm representing HUD.
Susie, are you going to represent
Yeah.
HUD? Thank you.
Yeah, Andy had a conflict today. He'll probably join in a few minutes, but I said I would pick up. So I'm Susie Sapolewski. I'm the Director of Asset Management here in the Detroit HUD office. We have about 130 properties in the city of Detroit that we either have market rate mortgages on, or subsidy contracts, or some combination of mortgage and subsidy contracts. We also have obviously cross involvement with both Mishta and maybe some other entities on the line as well. So our responsibilities are to oversee the legal documents that were signed to make sure that the affordability restrictions are being maintained, as well as the properties are being maintained in a good physical condition, and the owners are complying with the documents that they signed. And then on market rate properties, I also have a regulatory responsibilities for similar things, but just not the tenant side as much. It's more the mortgage side. So that's where our role is.
Thank you, Susie. Appreciate that. And appreciate you stepping in. Much appreciated. So let's get started. Our first question for our panel. And we'll start with Corey at the City of Detroit. So Corey, what are some of the tools that the city has in its tool bag that can assist in the preservation of affordable housing?
Definitely. So the city offers quite a bit of tools. So if you have a property that was funded with home, CDBG, or NSP with the city of Detroit, we have a lien on that in terms of a mortgage, assignment leases and rents, and or an affordable housing restriction. So some of the things we offer, like as of right now, a lot of properties are having a difficult time due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So, if your property is having difficulty, achieving enough of a net operating income to cover your debt service with the city, we can definitely work with you to restructure those existing debt service payments to make that more, to make, your NOI and cash flow more sustainable over a long-term period. Additionally, we have a lot of properties that are very old and were originated with city proceeds many years ago, and these buildings are in need of some sort of rehab. So some of our borrowers have applied for low-income housing tax credits through Mishta. So we've worked with our borrowers to put together letters of statement stating, what the city's liens are, and that we understand that they are applying for Mishta proceeds. In some cases, those have resulted in successful applications. We've also restructured our debt in a way to accommodate for new debt, whether that's from MISTA or a conventional lender. That way, they have the debt services written in a way that, the project will be able to make all of the payments on their senior debt and their debt to the city. We also, work on, amending our existing affordable housing restrictions. So, if you are interested in preserving affordability for an extended period, we can amend those documents. We have resources in-house, legal resources in-house that can work on that for you. We can also make introductions to some of our great partners, Enterprise, Scenair, Cleveland Housing Network, to name a few, that offer a lot of expertise on preservation. And then also, some of these loan documents can be very difficult to understand. So maybe if, let's say you're working for I'll use this as an example. Let's say, you just started working for a community housing development organization and you're inheriting, some of these projects, and you need to get up to speed on, what these loan documents consist of and what the city's liens and encumbrances are. We'd be happy to walk you through that. So those are just a few of the tools that our asset management team offers.
Thanks, Corey. Are there, is the city looking for, when someone comes to them with a workout plan, do they have to have the plan figured out and a long-term stabilization plan? Or are you also looking and evaluating sort of like an interim or temporary plans?
Yeah, great question. So that would be great if, our developers reach out to us, with a plan already put in place. But that's okay if the plan is not in place. Like, if we have a developer reach out and say, listen, either my project is having a little bit of difficulty achieving enough of an NOI to cover debt service, or if they come to us and say, hey, we want to recapitalize and preserve long term, we just don't know how to get there. We can work together on developing new terms and a strategy. So again, it's great if they have that plan ready to go and they just need the city to kind of make it a formality. But if we're here to help. So if there's a challenge that a property is facing and the developer doesn't know what to do, we can work together on solutions.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask the same question of MISTA. Troy, the question is, what tools do you have to assist in the preservation of affordable housing?
So pretty similar to what the process kind of Corey was just talking about. Really, if you're thinking about, preserving, I would recommend, contacting, me and my staff as early as possible. Assuming you already have MISTA debt on the project. I know we've kind of run into issues recently where, an owner thinks they're kind of getting close to applying for, or through the 4% NOFA. And then they find out that they've got a ton of like loss spread and swap termination fees, and it kind of like blows their debt structure apart. So, certainly if you've got bond debt on the property, talk to MISTA, as soon as you can, to really have like a firm grasp on what the debt structure of your project actually looks like. If you don't have MISTA debt, but you've got tax credits in the property, we can still certainly assist. If your project isn't really performing the way you would hope, and you're kind of thinking within the next few years you're going to be ready to recapitalize, we've allowed some regulatory relief on a lot of projects to kind of boost the cash flow and help the bottom line. We're certainly open to that. there are some things that we can't do. I'll say that up front. Like that applicable fraction number, we can't change that. If you're 100% affordable, we can't allow market rate units in your project. That's not something that we've ever, or we're able to move off from. And the other is that the original set aside, where if you're at 60 at 40, or 40 at 60, you've got to maintain that. Like we have some ability to move, within those kind of constraints, but those things are, we're really tied into. So, but that's something that's becoming more popular. We're getting more requests to maybe move some 40s to 50 or some 50s to 60 and things like that. And if you can demonstrate that the project really has that financial need for it, like that's something we're certainly open to. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to, we would rather have some affordability rather than none, so if your project really needs it, yeah, we're open to working with you on that. Another thing that we're seeing more of is the request for assumption of debt when they come in through the NOFA, where maybe the project can't afford to repay all the debt and be competitive. So they're asking, okay, well, what if we just assume this portion of it? And with that, people probably hear this from MSHDA a lot, but, I mean, we're open to looking at that too, but every deal truly is a little bit different. So, there's certainly no guarantee that we can make it work, but we've done it in the past. We found a way to, to kind of make that work and stuff like that. So, if that's kind of what your project needs, certainly don't be afraid to ask and work with like Chad and I and Jeff Sykes on that process to kind of figure out what your debt structure looks like in what some kind of like assumption of debt is going to look like. I know some people maybe don't even realize that MSHDA is willing to do that, so they don't even bother coming in through an alpha thinking that they're not going to be competitive. But certainly reach out and and we can talk through a lot of those issues with you.
Excellent, Troy. Great information. You mentioned the revising of the regulatory restrictions, the set-asides, and that being a tool, do you guys make it, a difficult hurdle to get over? You're asking for a lot of documents and really showing how bad the need is and what you're going to spend the money on. How difficult is that to go through and ask for a regulatory, adjustment there?
Well, I'd like to think we're getting more efficient with it. We didn't really have a process for it up until, the last year or two, probably. Now we're, like I said, we're becoming more efficient as we kind of like figure out really what we need to make an informed decision. One thing we always ask for, if you're a bond finance project, we've already got all the financial data that we would need. But if you're not, we request the last 3 years of audits, and then we can kind of look through that, and that should demonstrate your financial need. And if the project can certainly show that through their financial performance, then a lot of times we'll kind of review their request, but also maybe provide some different options for them too, where maybe they're asking to move, like what seems to be universal among their requests is that there's a lot of deep targeted units baked into these projects. Now, obviously the deep targeted units, there's a huge mission component to that. Mission is very cognizant of that. We want to keep as many deep targeted units as we can, but we also, especially in my group in asset management, we recognize the burden that they can bring to a project as well, just in terms of finances. It's hard to make a deal work when you have a lot of deep targeted units in there, absent of any kind of subsidy along with it. So if we can, we kind of work through those financials to see kind of what makes sense to hopefully help get this project over the hump. But then sometimes too, like if a project, for example, is eligible for a qualified contract, maybe we'll come back and kind of offer something and say, okay, we're willing to move off from more of these 30s if you're willing to waive your right to a qualified contract for 15 years. You know, that kind of like guarantees to MSHDA that, well, now we've at least, okay, we're giving up more deep targeted units than we probably have to, but now we're guaranteed to preserve the affordability of the project for another 15 years. So like all those kind of like little things can kind of make every negotiation a little bit different, but those are some of the things we look at.
Gotcha. We have a number of single family developers and owners on the call here, and there were a couple of years ago there was we had kind of made a request at a development to convert on day one of year 16 to be able to convert some of the deep targeting units from 30 to or 40% up to 60%. To allow for more flexibility as far as converting to home ownership. Is that still something that is viable that single family developers could come to you with?
Yeah, and I think that's probably pretty effective and even like a responsible strategy. MSHDA's biggest concern are the residents already in the units. You know, obviously we don't want anyone at that 30% income threshold or 40% that can't afford to buy a home, like can't afford to purchase it. Like that's our primary concern. Beyond that, yeah, I mean, as those units become vacant and things like that, like if we're ready to, you know, that's something we've been open to increase that, you know, that income threshold up to 60%, you know, it only makes sense. You know, I think home ownership is a great goal. Anyone that's converting from rental to home buyer, that's fantastic. You know, that's an outcome. That's probably the most desirable outcome. So for MSHDA to kind of help facilitate that, you know, that's something we're certainly supportive of. Okay.
And so a developer that has home debt and you know, is LIHTC and receives regulatory relief through MSHDA, Corey, what would the city then require to evaluate? Would they go second if they needed to revise some of the home units? Would you want to know, or how would a developer work with the city and MSHDA simultaneously to make sure that everyone was on the same page?
Sure. So the most important thing that the city's going to look at is, has this property exhausted its initial home compliance period? So for the most part, rehabs or properties that were originated with home proceeds for construction rehab, it's typically a 15-year minimum home compliance period. And then for new construction, that's typically 20 years from origination. So of those units, of the home assisted units, 80% have to be, you know, no greater than 60% of area median income, and then 20% cannot be any greater than 50% of area median income. So really during that, whether it's 15 or 20-year period, and it will obviously state that in your loan documentation, we really can't provide any relief during that time frame. Now, if you're outside of that initial home compliance period, we can definitely, you know, entertain some type of relief. And now I know, you know, you and Troy were just talking about the very deep targeting restrictions, like 30-40% of AMI. So if, whether it's in its home compliance period or not, you know, if that, let's say, goes up from 30% to 50% of AMI, the city, can entertain that, but the one, well, a couple things that are important that everybody needs to be mindful of is, one, we can't have those existing households displaced. So, we can entertain, bumping that up from 30% to 50% as an example, but the current household that is at 30% of AMI, we don't want them displaced. Now, if they voluntarily move, within the next year or two, or if, they're an elderly household and they pass away, as soon as that unit becomes available, then it can be occupied by somebody at a higher area median income. We also want to look at, Troy mentioned reviewing, the last 3 years of audit financial statements. My team does the same thing. Given that it's, February 2020, 2021, we also request company prepared financials for 2020, given that, a lot of these projects aren't going to receive their audits for the next few months. So one of the things we look at are the reserves that are set aside, and if necessary, can these properties dip into their reserves to at least cover that period between, when that legacy tenant at 30% of AMI is in their unit to when they eventually move out and are replaced with someone at 50 or 60%.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great information. I'll open it up. Are there anyone that has any questions about regulatory relief? Want to say anything? Now's your chance. So being an asset manager of the numerous deals that I have been, I found it to be the least expensive means to improve gross rent potential, raise the cash flow of the property. It is difficult to predict, the attrition and how many residents you can, so you have to use kind of averages of historical performance of how many units are going to turn over. And it can be difficult at your 30% units because they are so affordable, and they often are the best residential units in the neighborhood or in that area that you don't have a lot of turnover at the 30 and 40% AMI level. So you do have to plan for this years in advance because it is going to take multiple years to make the transition through attrition. So my recommendation, if is to start that process on day one of year 16, and it's gonna behoove you in the long run to do so. Even if you don't have a long-term recapitalization plan, it can be a interim step to move things forward. Like I said, increasing your gross rent potential and your cash flow. So it's a tool. I'm happy that MISTA and the city are viewing this in a positive light and wanting that to allow this to preserve affordable housing. So definitely look at this as an option for your deals. Susie, could you speak to how what tools that HUD has that can assist with the preservation of affordable housing in Detroit?
Sure. One of the biggest tools that we have is looking at rent increases or using rent comp study data to look at where the rents can be set, especially if there's going to be a substantial rehabilitation. We do a lot of post-rehab rent approval, which can help facilitate a deal. And oftentimes we work with our partners, the City of Detroit, MISTA, or other partners to be part of a deal, not necessarily always the sole provider of a preservation deal. It's quite common, probably most of the time, where we have other people involved. So our role really is to look at how we can facilitate. That's often with money, since we're the federal government, and subsidy contracts. The other thing I did want to mention is we do have a program that's fairly new that I don't know that everyone's heard of, and it's called an 8BB transfer. So if one owner doesn't want their Section 8 contract anymore, or something happens where they're not able to keep it, then we are able now to move subsidy from one contract to another, or one property to another property, as long as some criteria is met. We can also split the contract if it's being moved between multiple properties, so we wouldn't necessarily have to move it all to one property. We do try to keep those in the same, we prefer to keep those in the same general area where they came from. However, it's not always possible. So it is, we do see some movement around within the state, and sometimes even outside of state to state. We do also in those transactions protect the tenants. So we provide them with a tenant-based voucher, as well as moving the subsidy contract to one or more properties. So that's also a great preservation tool that could be used in combination with some of the other tools that have been discussed already today.
And Susie, when you look at the rental increases, is that they have a number of units not at fair market rent, and you're wanting to get them up to fair market rent?
Yeah, so basically most of our contracts are now set by a rent comp study. So it would be a little different than fair market rent because each owner does their own rent comp study. So some owners have, actively engaged us over the years and have rents that equal rent comp study rents, but we have quite a few owners that do not and just take what's called an operating cost adjustment factor each year. So they just take an OCAF instead of doing the rent comp study process. Or maybe it's been years since they did it, and the market definitely has improved in Detroit substantially from what we're seeing on rent comp studies. So we do have some properties, probably some decent percentage of properties that are not up to necessarily market rate rent. Or the other thing that happens is if they're doing a sub rehab deal, let's say with even FHA financing, which HUD would oversee, or MSHDA financing, or some other form of financing, and they're doing a lot of rehab, then the after rehab values may be more than their current rents. And that's where we can be helpful. If we have a rent comp study that proves that the after rehab rents will be higher, or in some cases significantly higher than the current rents, then we can approve those post-construction, and that helps the lender be able to write to those rents.
Gotcha. Susie, we had a question for you in the chat. Isaac is asking for the name of that contract whereby the one contract gets moved to another.
Yeah, it's called a Section 8BB. I can add it. I don't know if I'm able to access the chat afterwards, or if I can send it to you, Josh. I can send a reference. There's a notice out on Section 8BB that kind of explains the process. And you can
you can send that to me, and I can forward it to the group.
That sounds good.
All right.
This is Oren. I have a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, Susie, thanks for your time, and everyone else. I'm working on a property that has a HUD-HAP contract right now. We are currently going through the renewal process. I have two questions that you may or may not be able to answer. If we were to apply for a 4% or a 9% tax credit deal, you mentioned that you could underwrite to post-renovation, perhaps help underwrite to post-renovation rents. Would that be the same for kind of if you're working off the OCAF? If your mortgage is going up by so much because you're doing the renovation, let's say it is perhaps above, to support the property, it would be above market rates. Would you be able to kind of predict what the OCAF would be and say you'd be able to underwrite to that?
Yeah, that would be more difficult, because the reason we can write to post rehab is we actually have a rent comp study that shows us like current rent levels as well as post rehab levels. The OCAF would be difficult to predict what it's going to be because it changes every year. Now, certainly I would think your lender could take some sort of average, because it does, it's a known thing that it will increase. And, on the conservative side, they could take the lowest one ever issued, I guess, or they could take an average. But that would probably be the best we could do in that scenario. I know if you write with FHA, then we would write at, they would write at current rents, or as I mentioned, if you get a rent comp study that shows post rehab rents, then they could write at that level.
Awesome. Thank you. That's helpful. And then part two of the question is, in the OCAF or in a markup to market scenario, I think in OCAF, I've reviewed a few of the, I'm kind of new into this area of affordable housing, but I've reviewed the kind of budget based calculations to calculate it. Is there anywhere in there, or is there any ability to include asset management fees or profit to the owner of any sort?
Yeah, HUD doesn't consider those operating expenses, so we don't include those in the budget. However, the way the calculation works, it does add in some factors. So if you look in the 4350.1 Chapter 7, there's actually the budget-based worksheet in there, and you can see that it adds in like a vacancy factor, as well as, there's like a little bit of a fluff factor, I guess I would call it, in the numbers. If you run the numbers, it's about 2% or something like that, plus the vacancy factor. So obviously, if you're more occupied than what we're including in the budget, then you'll actually have, that's sort of how it generates surplus cash. So budgets are a little bit more tough than a lot of our owners choose to ask us to do sort of the markup to market program, where they just mark up to the rent comp study. So it's more a debate with HUD on what the rent comp study rents are versus the budget, because a budget is a little bit more difficult because you actually have to have operating expenses. And although there's some fluff, there's not a room for a lot in there.
Fantastic, thank you. And I do want to say that I've been working with Andy Uzzle, and he's been fantastic on all these issues. So
Great.
Kudos to your staff.
Great.
Excellent. My next question is for Chad Benson. We haven't heard a lot from him yet. So Chad, when developers, they have an idea or they're starting out, do they have to have everything figured out to come to MSHDA? Like, do they have to have their pro forma figured out before they come to MSHDA with an ask, or what do you guys look for?
I think it depends on what the ask is. Like Troy sort of mentioned, if there's MSHDA debt on the deal and they're looking to potentially, assume that, or, something along those lines, they don't necessarily need to have everything figured out to start that conversation, although sort of what they're thinking about doing, what they're thinking about pursuing factors into that conversation. So, but pretty much everything, that they're going to do with us, it's going to start with, them having a pretty good handle on what their pro forma is. The programs that we have that are what I think are, what most people would consider like the long-term preservation programs, where you're preserving the asset, you're doing rehab, you're recapitalizing, refinancing. Those types of programs, our direct lending program, our pass-through program, and our 9% program with our preservation category. Those types of programs are, they're competitive, and you have to submit an application, and you have to really have your, sort of your financing structure figured out when you go to pursue that program. So, and because, all of those programs, they're basically, like the 9%, for example, if you get a 9% award, that's sort of the key that unlocks your deal to be able to work. Without the 9%, a lot of times, deals aren't going to work on their own. So the 9% program, the direct lending, and the pass-through, a lot of times that's sort of the final piece to the puzzle that people are sort of looking for to make everything else kind of work in it. So yeah, to a large extent, I think, developers, they do need to have their deal structure figured out, their budget figured out, and everything like that of what they're looking to do. But to what Troy said initially too, they shouldn't necessarily wait to engage MSHDA for when they're ready to submit their application. They should start early. They should come in and have conversations with us early, so we can help them if they have, MSHDA debt, existing MSHDA debt that they're sort of trying to figure out how do they, how do they arrange that in their refinancing strategy?
Yeah, I can kind of see it as like a, you don't want to be so far down the path and then not have input from your lenders, and then you have to change everything. So it's kind of a good, a timing thing too, right? Like you want to still be open where you can make changes to your plan, get idea from MSHDA and the city what their plan, what their thoughts are before you kind of finalize your plan.
Yeah, you want to be able to have all those conversations. I mean, like, Troy mentioned, there's been, some examples of deals that, because they didn't have those initial conversations, they get to a point where they're ready to submit their application to us, and they realize that there's other pieces that were not considered with the existing debt that, sometimes those pieces can be substantial, and the difference between a deal looking like it's going to work or them having to go back to the drawing board to kind of figure it out. So having those discussions, you're going to identify sort of all those moving pieces, and then you'll be able to factor all those things in when you're looking to sort of finalize what does the project look like, what does the pro forma look like when you go to apply in say the direct lending program or the 9% program or the pass-through program or whatever. So it's I think the earlier people can reach out to sort of all the different stakeholders, the better, to sort of start organizing all those things, how they fit within the deal and how they structure it.
Perfect. Thank you, Chad. Stacy Eastbrook, sorry to put you on the spot. Are you able to talk? I have a question for Stacy in Enterprise.
Yeah, shoot.
So with Enterprise receiving, loan applications and things, how is Enterprise assisting developers with working with the different government agencies and coming up with a recapitalization financing plan?
So I'll give you kind of two answers. So first, as the lead for the preservation partnership, we are working with property owners on just preservation strategies in general. So as we're going through and looking at their kind of existing financial structure, how they originally became affordable, we're then working with them to identify what is the most appropriate path forward, whether that's a resyndication with LIS or with LIHTC, if that is working with HUD, or if this is maybe going down the Detroit Housing for the Future Fund route. So we're working with them and helping them identify what those strategies are, and then serving as a liaison or an advocate where need be, where appropriate. And that's really my role with Enterprise. And in the Detroit market, we're known as part of our solutions team. Another completely separate part of Enterprise is our financing team. And so we have the ability to do direct loans for affordable housing. We're also a syndicator. We have a CDFI. So where appropriate, if it seems like a good alignment, we potentially could be part of a transaction as well. In those instances, what I do is just make an introduction to the appropriate members of our Enterprise team. Certainly, we're advocating for all of our Detroit projects, but if we do come across that as an opportunity, we are making sure that the owners and developers are getting quotes from other funders, because we certainly don't want there to be any conflict of interest during our direct preservation work and kind of our overall mission alignment with affordable housing.
Perfect. Who would people contact at Enterprise to get started on an analysis and to help them figure out, what their next steps would be?
That would be me.
That would be you. Okay. Would you mind putting your contact information in the message or in the chat so people could contact you? And so please, Stacy, they have this expertise. They know many of our deals probably as good as anyone. And so please reach out to them. And the city, and in our preparation for this call, it was also apparent that MISTA and the city, you know, conversations don't cost money. No one's going to charge you money to have a conversation. And so the ideas that can come from those conversations, they see a lot more deals than you probably see dealing with your couple of developments. So they have, you know, many tools and ideas in their toolkit that they can help you figure things out with. So reach out to them. It doesn't cost any money while you're trying to figure out your next move for your deal. Yes, thanks, Stacy, for putting that in the chat.
No problem. And thanks for the plug. I echo everything you just said. It doesn't cost anything to have a conversation. So I put my email and cell phone in the chat. Feel free to reach out.
Perfect, perfect. So now the next question I have is that, you know, COVID has obviously changed the way business is being done. Probably maybe moving slower, maybe moving faster. I don't know. I guess it depends on, you know, if you're accustomed to using email or if you're accustomed to, you know, dealing face to face. But Troy, how are things changed with MISTA due to COVID, and how that may impact, you know, developers and preserving and their affordable deals?
Well, from my perspective in asset management, hopefully it hasn't. You know, MISTA is not, or I guess MISTA is different from a lot of like state agencies where we're not this, you know, huge like bureaucratic machine. MISTA, I mean, compared to other HFAs, you know, we are pretty big, but really in reality, you know, we cover a lot of ground and we're less than 300 people. So I feel like MISTA as a whole was able to adjust and move off site rather seamlessly, all things considered, since we had almost no warning that this was coming. So from my perspective, I guess I don't really feel like we have a lot of barriers right now to kind of keeping things moving. You know, a lot of my part of this process, you know, most of the preservation process kind of falls into like Chad's group. Most of mine is really just by having conversations with developers, you know, more in the idea phase rather than the execution phase. So it's kind of dealing with the debt they have on the property, or, you know, how the, you know, restrictions on their current deal might kind of overlap into their new deal, you know, kind of more of those structural questions that are answered before they get too far down the road. So from my perspective, I would hope our developers would answer the question the same way and say that it has had little impact at this point.
So who would answer this question on compliance? Is compliance doing physical site visits and inspections?
That's a good question. No, there was a period of time where kind of back when the governor's office was focusing more on the separate regions within the state. Now back in the summer, regions that were open, mostly northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula, where the risk was deemed rather low. We did resume physical inspections in properties in those regions, provided that the owner management company was comfortable with it. The IRS actually has suspended all physical inspection requirements through September of this year. So obviously that absolves MISTA of any, you know, basically having to meet their IRS's requirements, but really the physical inspection is there to, you know, protect the residents as much as anything. So we've really wanted to resume physical inspections in any way that we can. So there was like I said, kind of a brief moment this summer where we were able to keep going, but we're working right now into possibly doing some virtual physical inspections. That's something we're working on. It's not perfect, but that's something that, basically is exactly what it sounds like, where, like maintenance staff on site who are already, working on site and in resident units and things like that, would actually just be going through on like a Zoom type of format, where we can kind of get to some common areas and get into some resident units and things like that. But again, since it's not an IRS requirement, no one is like required to participate. It's more kind of developing, certainly in the development phase right now. And, we would need certainly the buy-in from owner and management and stuff like that to kind of proceed with it. But from Mishta's perspective, we want to see that the residents are still, living in suitable housing. So that's something we're working on. But everything is right now, like I said, I think it's September until those physical inspections are kind of put back in motion. But every date's tentative right now, Josh. I think we've all kind of experienced that.
Yeah. And the mission is the plan like next year to double up and do twice as many next year, or is it just going to be, this year was a wash? Last year.
That's a good question. Like we've been able to keep up with our file audits. That's something that we've been able to. It's been obviously far less problematic to do a file audit electronically than what you would be a physical inspection. So with that being kind of with that thought process, I would think hopefully we'd be able to get through more physical inspections with knowing that the backlog of the file audits is far less.
Perfect. Susie, is there anything you could add about how COVID has impacted HUD's policies and execution this year?
I actually wanted to say that Andy has now joined us, so we do have Andy Ezel on the line. Andy, why don't you, I assume you're there. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's going on with REAC?
Certainly, and I apologize, I don't have my camera on at the moment, but hopefully everybody can hear me all right. So,
yes,
as we all aware, COVID came unexpectedly. We weren't necessarily prepared for it. So REAC actually suspended inspections back in March of 2020. We looked at starting inspections again towards the end of September, actually beginning, I think, October 5th of 2020. And they were doing it based on kind of an evaluation of the COVID risk within an area. So they're actually assigning counties by color based on COVID risk, based on risk, I think, of cases per, say, 1,000. And they're only doing inspections in areas that are considered a green area. So they haven't had a rise in cases, or there's at least been a plateau and a potential decline in cases over the last 2 weeks. As you've probably seen nationally, we're not seeing a lot of that in the country at this time. And so I think from a standpoint of REAC inspections, they're very few and far between right now. There's a vetting criteria that they have to go through where they have to, one, meet the criteria for COVID, but also they have to maintain that criteria for at least a 2-week period, and then also through the scheduling period for REAC. So what we have seen is a few, very few successful inspections. There's actually, and I can probably throw the link up here in the chat as well, there's a website for REAC that has a mapping, a colored mapping of the different counties in different states. So you can check to see where Detroit is within that, and also any other counties that you're part of with regards to COVID cases and whether or not REAC inspections could potentially resume for those particular areas. Also, to kind of add to that too, we do have the option if from a risk standpoint, we have concerns about health and safety at a property, to one, partner with the city to see if we can get them out there. And if they identify health and safety concerns, we can work on trying to do an emergency REAC to get out there and do an assessment of the property. And that's really to ensure that we have decent, safe, and sanitary housing conditions in this interim. You know, it's been a challenge, to say the least, that we haven't been able to visit our properties, because sometimes, you know, properties can only tell you so much through data. It's really boots on the ground where you can see what's going on. And so, to make a long story short, there's really minimal REAC at this point until things start to stabilize. I will throw out the map link in the chat so you guys are aware of that. And I think the guidance is there as well. And to also kind of add to that, you know, I think REAC is looking at doing something along the lines of what Troy mentioned from MISTA, where we have a potential virtual inspection kind of through property management staff. I'm not quite sure where they're at with regards to how that's going to unfold through the Nspire program, but just know that obviously COVID is kind of changing the course of the way we do business. So it's something that is being considered moving forward for inspections. And then just another quick note too, I think Troy, you talked about file compliance. HUD is doing the same thing. We're allowing basically a virtual management and occupancy review. You know, our PBCA staff, our contract administrators, will try to schedule an on-site review, but if it's too risky for the population or based on the COVID cases in that particular area, we are authorizing virtual REACs where they do a remote file review, remote interview, and also a remote closeout. And I think so that's kind of the way we're moving forward, at least right now. And every 3 months we work on a work plan to identify those properties that we're going to go out to. And I think some of that was also identified based on risk too. So that's really what we're looking at least from HUD standpoint, trying to keep some kind of continuity of operations until things begin to open back up.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Andrew. Corey, same question for you. Anything at the city?
Yeah, so actually quite a bit. In terms of inspections, you know, similar to MISTA and HUD, you know, our inspections stopped in March when, you know, when really the COVID pandemic really started impacting the country. So our inspection team worked all summer with the City of Detroit's Health Department to come up with the appropriate protocols for safety when it comes to inspecting units for home, CDBG, and NSP compliance. So those standards are based on the City of Detroit's health standards and also the CDC. So those have been put together, and our team has resumed doing in-person inspections starting in August. So obviously everybody's safety is the highest priority. So if a property is scheduled for inspection by the city and the property owner, property manager, or any of the residents, you know, are concerned, like, you know, if anybody's at high risk, you know, please let us know. So, but again, our in-house inspectors, they do a great job. They follow all the appropriate guidelines, and they have all the PPE they need to go in and make sure that units and common areas are inspected in a safe manner. In addition to that, my team held quite a few webinars during the summer where we invited our borrowers and developers, and our asset management team partnered with the city's health department to talk about, you know, just safety guidelines for our multifamily buildings. So, you know, just in terms of, you know, what are the best practices for, you know, disinfectant, you know, wearing masks, social distancing, et cetera. And then we also circulated different flyers that property managers can print out and, you know, put in the common areas of different buildings and share with residents. In terms of, you know, the performance of these properties, you know, in terms of financial information that's coming in, some, not all of our properties are experiencing some challenges, and I don't think there's anything that our developers and property owners need to be embarrassed about, because you know, the eviction moratoriums and, you know, low-income households that have been laid off or furloughed as a result of the pandemic. This is happening across the country for not only affordable properties, but multifamily properties. So, for our borrowers, please don't be embarrassed. If you're having any challenges, financially speaking, please let us know. We've already started working with some of our borrowers on, restructuring their debt payments. Given that, a lot of the rental revenue that's been collected in the past has gone down, and also operating expenses have gone up in many cases because, now, a lot of the maintenance does involve extra cleaning. So in short, that's a lot of, the challenges that we faced, in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thanks, Corey. Well, this it sounds like the city was the only one to still continue doing physical inspections. So that's commendable, and great job by you guys for making those that shift in with the PPE and extra notification to the residents, management companies. So great job. The communication, is it slower, faster because people are on their email all day, every day? Has that kind of changed for you guys, Corey? Anything changes in that regard due to COVID?
Yeah, well, my team and I were all working remotely, and there have been some circumstances where my team and I have had to, meet with some of our senior leadership to help get legal documents executed. But yeah, we're still working remotely. I've been with the city for a little over 2 years, and it seems like it's busier now than it's ever been. So, yeah, certainly there is a lot in my team's portfolio, or I'm sorry, in our pipeline at the moment. So, I appreciate all of our borrowers and developers continuing to be patient as we continue to take on more and more requests, whether they are applicable to COVID-19 or not.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have one more question. We had the city, MSHDA, and HUD all having recent or about to have recent leadership changes. And just wanted to start with you, Chad. And, MSHDA goes through, gets a new executive director every couple of years with the appointment of a new governor. So how might this one, you guys been through this before, probably are pros at it. How might this change be similar, be different? What are we to expect with the new executive director at MSHDA?
Well, I mean, it's hard to tell exactly how it's all going to play out. But I think, like you said, I mean, in terms of program staff and everything like that, I mean, we've had a pretty, I mean, we've had a lot of turnover even with program staff too. But I would say in terms of succession and things like that, MSHDA's always done a pretty good job of, having people that are sort of going to step in their place and keep continuity, to the program. So, I mean, even though there has been, a fair amount of turnover, I guess, at MSHDA, I think it seems like it's always been the goal, and it continues to be the goal, among the, sort of the senior leadership there, that we want to, keep the continuity. And we understand that, for developers and the development community and, partners like Sinair and HUD and the city of Detroit, like it's important to have consistency with these things because they are very complicated and deals take a lot of time to sort of mature and go through the process. So, I think that's been the overall goal with a lot of things that we've had to, sort of deal with in transitions is to maintain, consistency and maintain sort of, a consistent a consistent path forward and consistent, people that are sort of, I guess, guiding the ship, I guess. But it's hard to tell. Yeah, it's hard to tell with changes and, what will happen. But I don't know. I'm confident that, things will keep moving forward the way that they have been moving forward, sort of regardless of what changes may take place.
Excellent. Andrew, what about you? We're gonna have a new lead at HUD. What might we expect to see differently at HUD with the new appointment?
Certainly, I can speak a little to this and then defer to Susie, as she certainly has more of the experience with prior changes. But, a lot of the changes from the new administration won't necessarily trickle down to the field office level, at least not immediately. And frankly, any of the new positions or programs that come out, they have to be voted through and have to be passed before they can trickle down. So, initially, we're not seeing much in the way of changing other than there might be some internal processes, such as some hiring holds temporarily until the transition is complete. That being said, I do know that the incoming secretary, she has a lot of background within I think it was actually in Ohio, within the low-income housing area. And so I think I would see a very pro-tenant position from HUD and a very pro-affordable housing position as well. So I would expect to see that we're going to see some movement, positive direction towards affordable housing. I know that we've been quite production-based lately, which has been great with where the interest rates and everything are. So, as far as specifics to what we see come down, I don't think it should impact much day-to-day business, but certainly we could see some positive policy come out of it. Susie, is there anything that you want to add to that?
I think that's a really great summary. I do know that from my point of view, we've already been asked from the incoming secretary's office to provide information on affordable housing in the Midwest, which I think is a really good sign. She kind of wanted to get her hands around the inventory. We've also prepared some incoming packets for her. She asked a lot of questions about policy and about affordable housing specifically. And we do also have some staff that haven't been brought in quite yet, but should be here within the next week or two, that will be incoming into asset management or housing, I should say, multifamily housing. And unlike in the past where they've, as Andy said, had more of a production focus, the folks that are coming in have more of a policy or asset management focus. So we're really excited to hopefully have, an upcoming administration that wants to focus on policy and maybe fix some things that have been problematic for a while. I know that I am personally on 3 or 4 things with headquarters where we are rewriting policy right now. And all of them are really critical areas that owners have asked us about, or we think there needs to be changes. So I think that it's an exciting time going forward. And I think that it'll be good for affordable housing.
Excellent. Thank you, Susie. And Corey, we've city HRD already has a new director. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what to expect there.
Sure thing. Yep. So as I'm sure some of you have already read in the news, the group executive director of housing and planning, who was Arthur Jemison, has moved on to work for HUD in Washington, D.C. So it's really kind of been a next person up process in the city. So taking Arthur's place will be Donald Rencher, who was previously our director, and our current deputy director, Julie Schneider, will take Donald's place as director of housing and revitalization. So I think they'll all do great in their roles. I'm biased because I've worked with them, but I'm really glad that the promotions have been in-house instead of bringing someone from the outside. So there may be a few changes within housing and revitalization in terms of like roles and responsibilities, but I don't anticipate those changes to be dramatic. So I think for the most part it will be business as usual.
Excellent. Well, maybe it'll be Arthur will be able to have more influence in DC and more resources will flow to Detroit. So that would be a great thing. Well, that basically concludes our seminar today. I appreciate the panel. You guys all did excellent. My goal was, I hope everyone had something, an action item that they're going to be able to pursue from this meeting. The city is for preserving affordable housing is a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. And hopefully you learned something and will be able to apply something to your development that's going to assist you in that endeavor to keep your development affordable for many years to come. I'm going to conclude with that, unless there's any questions. Mike, do you have any closing comments that you want to add?
No, I just want to say thanks to the panelists. I thought this was great. So really well done.
Well, thank you all. This was great. So we'll be back at it next Wednesday, 11:30. I sent out a calendar reminder yesterday. If you did not receive that and you'd like to be on there, you can shoot me an email at joshwhite@Senair, and I will forward you the invite so that you can have the Zoom username and password to join that meeting next week. So with that, I guess we'll conclude. Appreciate every one of you. Keep up the great work, and we'll talk to you next week. See y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.